Hello, I'm Professor Edward Santow, co-director of the Human Technology Institute at UTS. The recent cybersecurity incidents are reflective of a changing risk landscape, where a few years ago it was very, very rare for any kind of cyber breach to take place. We're now seeing an increasing number of companies as well as government agencies that are unfortunately dealing with cyber criminals. And so what companies really need to do is to respond to that changing risk landscape by upping their protections, but also asking some very fundamental questions about what personal information they need to hold and in what conditions they need to hold it and for how long. So we're living in the fourth industrial revolution. It feels like every day of the week there's a news story about a new form of technology, and that in some ways is true. But I think the thing that is most significant right now is the rise of machine learning. Many people will be aware of machine learning, but really at its heart is a very simple concept, which is this massive increase in computing power coupled with modern algorithms that allow us to see patterns in big data sets, patterns that we would have taken hundreds, thousands of person hours, perhaps even more, previously to try and perceive. We can now, identify instantaneously. And so what that allows us to do is to see correlations between, the metaphorical butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil and a change in the weather here in Australia. In reality, what it really means is that companies are able to understand their data much more effectively and get much deeper insights in their data. The problem with machine learning is that we know that correlations aren't always meaningful. So for every correlation that suggests that X is connected to Y, we also know that there's a lot of white noise where in fact there is no connection, causal or otherwise, between X and Y. So sifting through that white noise is actually one of the biggest challenges that companies have to face now. Companies and government agencies have this extraordinary availability of data sets now. I mean, there were always big data sets, but they're now being joined up in ways that are wholly new. And we have this technology that allows us to do something with those data sets in ways that we previously couldn't. And so what that in turn requires is for organizations to set very clear boundaries about what they are going to do and what they're not going to do, and to make sure at the very least that they're complying with privacy, cybersecurity, and other laws that restrict what organizations can do when they're trawling through their own data, as well as data sets that they may have access to from other organizations. And so that means taking a very methodical approach. Too often we see organizations that kind of just dive into the data as if it's a swimming pool and don't think first about what they need to do to keep their customers safe, but also to stay on the right side of law and ethics. And so that means thinking this through in advance. It means having clear policies and procedures in place, and also escalation processes too, because we know that things are going to go wrong. That's a given. And so what you want to do is make sure as an organization that if there is a data breach, or if a part of your organization does the wrong thing and may expose someone's personal information publicly, that you're able to put a lid on that problem as quickly as possible, you're able to remediate any harm, and you're able to make sure that you have an effective discussion with the regulator. Secured data storage is something that is increasingly at the forefront of company directors, but also senior executives, because we're seeing this increase in cyber security attacks and threats. And we're also seeing over time that organizations are going from having relatively small data stores to immense data stores. And so it really starts with a few key questions. The first is, do we really need to collect this personal information in the first place? If the answer to that question is no, then you might actually be solving a whole lot of pain. Secondly, if you do need to collect the personal information, are you legally justified in doing so? And are you only collecting and using it in accordance with the law and the expectations of your customers? And that's vitally important and sometimes not an easy question to answer. So spending some time really thinking through that problem is vitally important. And then thirdly, making sure that you have good systemic oversight of your organization's data collection and use practices, so that if there is a problem that starts very small, we know that it can get quite big quite quickly. And so that oversight mechanism is really important. Facial recognition technology is exciting. We use it often without thinking in our smartphones, at the international border, and in a whole range of other situations. And often those use cases are reasonably safe. That is, they're not no risk, but if it's a well-designed system and the technology is itself top notch, then you can be confident that people's privacy and other rights are being protected. We also know that companies are starting to row out quite a long way. So using facial recognition in more exotic use cases, perhaps to identify potential shoplifters, to try and assess people's face for insights about their mood or how responsible they are. Those areas are incredibly experimental, much more prone to error, and are much more intrusive on people's privacy and other rights. And so when organizations think quite deeply about how and whether they might use facial recognition, I think it's important to start with what's the low-hanging fruit here? What is tried and tested and we know will be safe to use with our customers? And then only go beyond that where there's a very powerful justification for doing so.